Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this week for CIS103, Introduction to Social Media. This week, I'm really happy to have Maribel Quezada Smith, and we're going to talk a little bit about podcasting. So I'm very excited for that. So let me, before I start into a few intro questions, let me just talk about Maribel. So I've known Maribel for a number of years, since before we both wound up in Phoenix. I actually knew her back when we were both in Columbus, Ohio, of all places.
Yeah.
So she's traveled around a lot in a number of different cities and found her way to Arizona in the last few years. But so Maribel is a bilingual media producer with experience creating for television, branded content, podcasts, and digital marketing. A few years ago, Maribel discovered she was living her life for other people instead of herself. That's when she started down the journey of self-discovery and empowerment. This journey confirmed a fear she had long avoided confronting, the fear that she didn't completely belong anywhere and had to choose a cultural side to succeed in life. Over the past few years, thanks to a decent amount of soul searching, Maribel realized she no longer has to choose a cultural side. She simply has to embrace her own journey as a Mexican immigrant woman living in the US who loves hip hop and rancheras. All of this self-discovery, combined with her 14 plus years as a professional in video production and marketing, inspired her passion for creating stories with meaning in order to satisfy her desire for purpose and connection, which is how the podcast Diferente was born. Today, Maribel helps entrepreneurs, startups, and growing brands build deeper connections with their ideal customers through meaningful video and audio content. Thank you, Maribel, for being part of the class today.
Gracias. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. So let me, I'm just going to start off with just a little bit of intro questions. So I Googled you, as I Google pretty much everybody these days. And one of the things that I came across when I did that, Maribel, is, well, actually, this is on your Instagram. And I found that you had recently published your 153rd episode of your podcast, which is a huge number. So I was just interested to know, like, just tell us more about Diferente, your main podcast. I know you have multiple, because obviously you have your background is Birdies Not BS. So I'd love to know more about that. If you could just share with us, what are you working on these days?
Yeah, so what am I working on? A lot of different things, but as you can see in my backdrop, this is Birdies Not BS, the other podcast that I produce. So I have my baby, which is Diferente. It's a podcast where I am the sole person, the producer, the creator, the host. And then Birdies Not BS is a podcast that I co-created, I should say, with Cheyenne Woods and Doug Smith, and they are the hosts. Cheyenne and Doug are the hosts. I produce the podcast. We are going into our third season this April. So this podcast is about golf and the modern experience in golf. It's mainly about growing the game among the youthful and those people that are trying to change it and make it better for the future. So that's the podcasting thing that I'm working on now. And of course, Diferente is also still going strong. Our latest episode came out last week, and it was ironically with Cheyenne Woods, and we were having a conversation about biracial identity. So my podcast Diferente is about exploring and celebrating the complexities of living life between two or more cultures. And that's just like a whole lot of subjects that you can, as you can imagine, and you're someone who lives a multicultural life as well. So it's been a really interesting journey with Diferente, kind of trying to explore different topics that pertain to that, and also that pertain to the growth as myself, like my own self-growth, my own personal and professional growth as well. So I have a lot of personal experiences that I share in the podcast, along with other interviews that I've had as well. And just a tad bit of background on that is that I'm a producer by trade. So I have been working in production for many years. I worked on many documentaries, small and long format, short and long format, and also for TV documentary content as well. So I have an extensive background when it comes to production, and that's kind of what led me into podcasting, was just exploring a different medium, something that was really growing and booming. And that's what, where we are now.
Very good. How long has Diferente been around? Because you said 3 years for third season of Birdies Not BS.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's necessarily years.
Yeah, that's a good point. So podcasting, you can do, just like any other show too, you can split your seasons. You can have like season 1 and season 2 in the same year. So that doesn't necessarily mean you've been doing it for an X amount of years, but Birdies Not BS is a seasonal podcast. However, it is yearly. So this is going to be our third year with Birdies Not BS. Diferente launched in 2018. So we got 3 years also. Because technically, I'm saying 3 years because technically I took a year off for a lot of different reasons, which I go into on my podcast. So technically I've been with Diferente also 3 years.
3 years for Diferente?
Yeah, as well.
Okay, cool. How would you say that Diferente has evolved? Or yeah, maybe this, like, first of all, why podcasting versus blog or Instagram only, or I guess, how did you decide on podcast for Diferente? And then the second question would be like, how has it evolved, I guess, since you started 3 years ago?
Sure. Well, so I used to have a blog. I had a blog a long time ago. I did a cooking blog, like a food blog, and then I also had a personal blog. And writing was always a big passion of mine. So I explored that a lot on the personal side. And one day I decided, you know what, a lot of people are not reading because they don't have time to read nowadays. I feel like content's shifting a lot, and it's becoming more of a, I don't know if it's a hassle, but for a lot of people, it's becoming harder and harder to just stop and read. So I thought, well, what about all those people that are driving to work and all those people that are doing, cleaning the house or working out? They can't just be focused on a page. So I thought, maybe I'm gonna do a podcast and see how that goes. So honestly, it was kind of like a whim thing that I started thinking about a lot. For me, creation is a passion. So I had to create. I'm always creating, and I always had to create something in order to feel like I'm fulfilled. So I thought podcasting would be the natural step. And that's basically how I got started into, just trying it and seeing how it worked. And after doing Diferente, it gave me a lot of experience, and it connected me to a lot of different people, a lot of professionals as well in the industry. So that allowed me to bring that talent and bring that experience to other people. And so that's how Birdies Not BS was born.
Gotcha. Okay. And then do you feel like over the 3 years, like episode 153 is pretty different from episode 1, or do you think that they're kind of followed a similar path?
So no, they're different. I mean, like when I launched, I feel that I did not niche down specifically. So that's one of the things that I always teach people now when I work with them, because I'm also a production coach, and we can talk about that a little bit later. But something I really stress to people is being niche as much as you can. And for me, that was kind of a problem when I launched Diferente, because I was like, oh, I want to have a conversation, but I also really want to explore different things. And I'm very curious, so I want to ask a lot of questions. So I kind of left it broad on purpose, because I was worried that it was going to be too specific and that I was going to limit myself, which is the wrong mentality to have, in my opinion. Hindsight's 2020, right? But I mean, and I don't want to say the wrong mentality, but I do think that when you're a solo podcaster, it really makes sense to actually launch something that's very niche and specific instead of going broad, especially if you're trying to attract, an audience and gain momentum. It's very helpful to have a more specific subject or topic. So it's very different because I started it out being strong interview based. Also, I was very focused on different topics like business, creativity, life. I mean, that's very broad, like business, creativity, life are very broad subjects. You could do a lot with that. So after doing season 1, I was like, all right, I really need to focus and narrow down where I'm going and where I'm headed with this, because I was kind of losing a little bit of that momentum. So I actually worked with a branding person, a branding expert, who I think you've had on before, or you know him, Alex, and he helped me niche down, and he helped me figure out a little bit better of a path for Diferente. In general, just for my brand, like how we were going to use Diferente as a part of my brand. And then I also worked with a coach who helped me, a creativity coach, who helped me focus on the development of the next season and the topics, and just kind of get a little bit more specific. So the main difference, like I said, is before I was more heavy on interviews and broad on subject matter. Now Diferente is where we, explore and celebrate the complexities of living life between 2 or more cultures. So it's very specific in that niche. And also I made it bilingual. So it's the first time that I'm going to be doing some more episodes in just Spanish, not mixed English and Spanish, but just Spanish. And that's also a very interesting challenge for me.
That's really cool. Yeah, I look forward to that. So people can basically, that's one of the things I think recently I've searched for. I've literally Google searched best podcast in Spanish. Like,
well, what did you find?
That's interesting. So that's a really good niche. So anyway,
yeah.
I want to ask one other just kind of question about the elements of a good podcast, and then Zoe, after that, I want to ask your questions after this one. But Maribel, in your opinion, what would you say if for folks or for our students? A lot of them are entrepreneurs. They're creating a lot of content for their own. They create content for this class for me, but
okay.
Mostly Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, some of the more standard ones. Probably won't get into podcasts that much in this class. However, in another class, it's potential. But anyway, for them thinking about what platforms they should choose, like what would you say are the basic elements of a good podcast?
Oh man, the basic elements are definitely your niche, like your topic. So that would be number one for me, is make sure that you have a very specific topic or specific area that you want to focus on for the show. So be as specific as possible. Another thing that makes a successful podcast is definitely sound quality. So a decent microphone, a decent pair of headphones, and just some basic ability to edit, just to be able to put together an episode is very helpful to have a successful show and make sure that people are actually having a good experience when they're listening. Just so you know, I'm not actually using my podcast microphone right now because it's set up in a separate studio that we have in the house, and it's being used at this moment. So for recording purposes. So I'm using the computer audio, and you can actually tell the difference significantly. So that's another thing that I highly recommend, is to make sure that you have somewhat of an idea of how the equipment works, and just a decent equipment. You don't have to spend a lot of money, but just something a little bit better than your basic computer. And another thing is understanding that podcasting is all about promotion. So if you want people to listen, you have to understand that it's going to take you about 50% of the time that you create your show. Say you spend 10 hours on your show a month or a week, plan to understand that it's going to take you probably also 5 hours to promote. So about 50% of the time that it takes to create is also going to take you to promote it. And that's really important, because otherwise people are not going to listen to your show. So you need to make sure you get it out there.
Right, because they're not going to know how to find it. They're not going to be aware of it if you don't spend that time. So I see what you're saying.
Yeah, but I mean, those are basic things that I'm giving you. A lot of people could tell you go more in depth, and I can definitely go more in depth about what makes a successful show. I mean, that can be very relative as well. Like what makes a successful show for me doesn't necessarily make it for you or for other people. So it's a personal decision, but at the same time, I do think that the basics are what I just mentioned.
And just curious, as far as editing software, if there's, for anybody that's like looking for kind of a simple way to get started, do you recommend anything as far as either editing software and then also maybe an affordable microphone?
Yes. So I believe Audacity is still semi-free. So Audacity is a software that a lot of podcasters use to edit and record.
What's it called again?
Audacity.
Audacity, gotcha.
Audacity. Am I saying it wrong?
No.
So that's one. And then I use not iTunes, but GarageBand for recording. Like if I'm just doing a solo episode, or if I'm recording in person, I'll use GarageBand a lot because it comes with my computer. It's free, and it's a great software. Honestly, if you know how to use it, it's enough to get you started. When you hire an editor, they're probably going to be using something more advanced, like maybe Pro Tools or other different types of software out there for audio editing. Microphones, as far as the basic microphone, I would recommend the Audio-Technica ATR. I forget the number, but if you just Google Audio-Technica ATR podcasting, it'll probably shoot out the most basic and best microphone that they have for podcasting. It's running about $120 right now. When I started, it was like $70. So just to give you an idea of how popular podcasting has become, their prices have gone up, and maybe the microphone has also, gotten better. But that's just one microphone that I would highly recommend. I will say, don't buy the hype. So a lot of people end up buying pretty microphones over useful and good quality microphones. A pretty microphone is the Blue Yeti. And I don't have anything against Yeti, but I do find that the Blue Yeti microphone is not great for podcasting. Some people still like it, but I don't think the sound quality is great. So, just a couple of things to remember when you're recording. And that's really, honestly, that's it. You just need a decent mic and a decent software to get started. Because like I said, sound quality is very important. Headphones, of course. Anytime you're having a session or a recording session with someone over the internet, like if you're not in person, make sure you're wearing headphones, both of you, or whoever's in the call.
Why is that? Is it just because like the audio? Why is that? Just curious.
Because the audio feeds back into the computer microphone. If you don't wear headphones, that's why I have my headphones on, because I don't want to ruin your audio experience, in the event that there are other people that might join in. I want to make sure that when I'm speaking, you can hear me clearly. And then when you're speaking, it doesn't come back out into the microphone that my computer has. So it kind of creates a little bit of an echo. It's just not as good as an experience. In fact, sometimes if you're wearing headphones and you have them up too high, your microphone will pick up the headphone audio as well. So you also need to be careful about that.
Great points. So Zoe sent in a few questions. Zoe, if you would kick it off with a couple of your questions, be great.
Yeah. So my first question is, what is your favorite podcast episode that you've ever recorded?
Oh, yes. So my favorites. Well, I have a few, but I would say that latest one is Making Rich White Lady Decisions. That's one of my favorites that I've done so far. As far as the one I had, as well as the episode that I did last week, which was about exploring biracial identity. I feel that both of those episodes have been very specific to what I'm trying to achieve when it comes to the Diferente mission of exploring the multicultural perspective. So, Making Rich White Lady Decisions was inspired by my own life experiences and doubts of making progress in my career by making decisions that a lot of rich white women make for themselves, like hiring a coach or paying for a nanny or different types of things that are sometimes very hard for people of color to understand why they're important or to make the investment on. Even counseling, having a therapist or going to counseling has been something that I've had to understand that it's important for certain things. And I think that it related very well with a lot of people out there who have gone through a similar experience. So that's definitely been one of my favorite episodes.
Awesome. And then my second question is, what is one piece of advice that you give to your clients about creating videos for their brand?
Oh man, you made it very hard for me because one piece is hard. Like I have a lot of advice about that. But the biggest one that I usually tell people is keep it simple at first. So don't try to go too fancy when it comes to creating video content. Like don't add a bunch of effects or don't add filters or extra, text and, graphics. Try to keep things very basic and simple at the beginning when you're first starting out, because it'll actually look cleaner. It'll be better for the audience. It'll be better received by them, and it'll be a better experience overall to just kind of see the content at the beginning. You don't need a lot of fancy effects or graphics or text to make things look good. You really just need a decent camera, decent audio, and somewhat of, an idea of what editing, is supposed to be like. In general, that's my, one of the biggest things that I can teach people is just start with the basics. Don't go too crazy at the beginning. And as you get better, you can definitely add on if you're the one editing. Obviously, if you're not the one editing and you're paying someone for that, then they can probably create more, interesting things for you aesthetically. But if you're doing it all yourself, it's just going to be really hard. It's going to overwhelm you if you go in with like a lot of expectations or wanting to put in too many things into your content.
Great question, Zoe. Thank you very much for that. Now, I've got a few questions that I wanted to ask on behalf of the class that sent them in. So another good one was from Allison. Now, this one's about like content creation and how you, I guess, get inspired. So she asked, how are you able to create content even when you are feeling uninspired?
It's not easy. Honestly, I mean, creation is about inspiration for me a lot of the time. And I've had to teach myself to understand that as a creative, I have to crank out content regardless of whether I'm feeling inspired or not. So I've actually had to learn how to do it. It's been a skill that I'm still developing and I'm still working on. It's a lot easier, I will say this, it's a lot easier to get creative and flowing when you're getting paid for it. So when I'm producing on a show or when I'm writing for someone or when I'm creating content for someone else, it's definitely easier because there's a little bit of that added pressure to deliver. And you have more of a structure. You know exactly what your deadlines are. You know what the goals are. You know what the client wants, right? Or what the network wants from you. When you're creating for yourself, you have to set the parameters on your own. So a lot of the time, you don't even know where to begin and you often get lost, especially if you have other things going on in your life. So for me, working with a creativity coach helped me understand the basics of how to make sure, for example, wake up in the morning. And one of the first things that I do is sit down and start with something creative. Like it's just, even if it's just spending 30 minutes on this podcast episode that I want to create for later. Or just spending 30 minutes writing another chapter to a book. I'm not doing that, but if someone is, that's an example. So setting that expectation that every morning you're creating something for your project or whatever it is that you're working on creatively, even if you don't feel like it, even if it's not something that's coming to you naturally in that moment, just making sure that you actually go through the exercise of sitting and doing something like that for 30 minutes is going to get you used to it. And it's going to become kind of like muscle memory eventually. So that's one of the things. And then also, I started to realize that when you get encapsulated in a bubble and you spend a lot of time by yourself creating and you don't spend enough time around people, now it's hard because of the pandemic, but before, you're just stuck at home, always working on your podcast, or you're stuck at home, always working on whatever project you have. If you're not actually experiencing life, it becomes very hard to actually be inspired to create. So that's been a struggle for me as well, because I'm a workaholic. So it's very easy for me to just be like, no, it's Saturday, I'm going to work on my podcast all day. And my husband will be like, but don't you want to take a walk? Don't you want to go sit at a restaurant and have a drink or something and hang out with our friends? And he's right. Like a lot of the time I would push that aside in order to work on my stuff. But then I started to feel drained and realized that I actually needed the energy from other people and other experiences in order to actually help me create. Because otherwise, think about it. What we're creating is based on our experiences, right? For the most part.
Makes sense. So I've got a few questions about culture. So one of the questions is, and I think this is relevant. Both of these questions are very relevant based on the topic you discussed. But so one of the students in the class, she's of Assyrian descent. So she asks, what advice would you give to someone whose culture is not well known to others? How do you put that culture out there for others to be interested in?
I saw that question and I was like, how do I answer that? Because I don't have that personal experience. To a certain extent, I'm Mexican. So my culture is fairly well understood in the United States. However, it's also highly stereotyped. So I would say that one of the main things for me is to make sure that I'm always educating at the same time as entertaining. So I don't want to perpetuate stereotypes. It's funny sometimes to talk about them and to discuss how some of the time they're true, you know, certain things that we say about ourselves or that people say about us, yeah, they have some truth to them. So that's fun, it's funny. But I really want to make sure that I'm sharing my culture in a way that's educational as well. So try to stick to facts and make sure that I'm not just putting information out there that I'm making up. You know, I definitely want to make sure that I'm a truthful source for things. So that's one way, is to make sure that you're aiming to educate a little bit and aiming to open people's minds about something. Exploration is really big for me. So for my culture, you know, I want to explore certain things with people. And that's the kind of ride that I want to take you on as a listener. As a storyteller, I want to take you on a ride with me. I want to go on a journey with you through an experience that I've had. And in that experience, you'll learn about my culture. So for example, if I'm talking about, like I said, rich white lady decisions, I'm taking you on a journey about how I came to make certain decisions that have helped me in my career. And I later labeled those decisions rich white lady decisions. As I'm taking you into that journey, I'm explaining to you where I come from, why that was difficult for me, how I was raised to believe that I did not need counseling, that was for, you know, rich people that were bored, how I was raised to believe that there were certain things that I just had to do on my own. So that's cultural. And that's, you know, that's kind of how I blend the two. And then I think that's one of the best ways that you can teach people about your experiences or your culture, is to take them through the journey, and to share that personal side of you as well.
And this next question is from Yvette in the class. And she was talking about a specific podcast. You'll probably know the one that she's talking about, but she asked about one about meditation. Okay. And she said she listened to your meditation podcast, and she said she tries to meditate by observing her surrounding. But how do you do it when you're experiencing anger and frustration? She's tried to inhale, exhale, but it doesn't work for her.
I know. It's like, I feel you. I've been there too. So I'm going to tell you how. Practice. Just like you have to practice sitting at your desk or at your favorite corner every morning and working on your project or working on your creative passion project, it's the same thing with meditation. You have to do it on a regular basis in order for it to start working and start having an effect on your life. It's not like something that you can only do once in a while and expect for it to actually start working immediately. If you're trying to be able to become more mindful, because for me, that's the goal with meditation at this time. My goal right now is to become more mindful. I think that the most important thing is that you have to practice it. You have to meditate on a regular basis, every day for 10 minutes, or every other day for 10 minutes, or even just once a week for 10 minutes. As long as you're doing it consistently, that's what makes a difference. So just so you know, when I was giving birth to my twins, I was going through a very stressful time. And probably the 2 months before we gave birth, I meditated every day. So I started meditating every morning for 10 minutes, about 2.5 months before they were born. And honestly, that made a huge difference at the birth, because I was in a really bad place, headspace wise, for a moment. I had a moment there, and my husband was able to help me meditate and get out of that and get back to neutral. I really don't believe that I would have been able to do that had it not been for the fact that I had been practicing regularly.
Great answer. This one's a little bit more fun. So I think so. You're from the class also read your bio, and she asked, "Who's your favorite hip hop artist, and do you plan to have them on one of your shows?"
Oh, wouldn't that be nice? I'll just put it out there. Drake, Jay-Z.
All right.
I mean, no, I definitely am a fan of different artists. I don't like. I was gonna say I hate to say it, but I don't. I mean, I used to be a really big Kanye fan. Like, you know, I mean, those early albums were awesome. T.I., man, some of his early stuff was really cool too. I I mainly live in the late 90s and 2000 to 2010 era when it comes to hip hop, to be honest. Like those are like my biggest hip hop memories and what triggers the most joy for me when I listen to them. The later stuff, like there's some good stuff, for sure. I mean, I've heard some cool stuff from Chance the Rapper and other people like that, but I always go back to those eras because I think it's a connection that I have to the culture here in the United States that I was able to build through music. Coming in as a Mexican girl who didn't know anything about hip hop. I mean, the closest thing I came to knowing rap was Will Smith, the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, watching his show in Mexico. And it was in Spanish, so, you know, I mean, there's only so much you can take away from that. So I think that, honestly, I have to credit hip hop for opening up a pathway to the culture for me and allowed me to connect with my peers a little bit better.
Very good. Okay, so got a few more student questions. I'm going to come back to you in a second. I've got like 2 other questions I want to ask. So in the last 10 minutes or so, let's see if we can get this covered. So talking about podcasts specifically, titles and subjects, how do you write an effective podcast title? Or even a name for your show? Like how do you come up with those important names?
Research, I would say, it has a lot to do with it. So, you know, as I brainstormed for show names for Birdies Not BS and for Diferente, I was like, just, you know, going with the flow, just kind of writing down different things that I thought about. And one day I was saying, like, it's just, you know, I want to talk about this show. I want it to be about what, you know, like feeling like out of place, and how do you grow through that, and how do you connect with yourself, and how do you accept yourself even though you're different, and people have always told you that you're not good enough because you're different. And my little, back then she was 10, my 10-year-old niece goes, Diferente. So that was easy. But for Birdies Not BS, we did a lot of research. You know, we threw out a lot of names, a lot of ideas, a lot of really bad ideas that we can laugh at now. And we just made sure that it wasn't taken already. We went on, like, we did like trademark searches. We did social media searches. But I think that the title definitely has to have some sort of connection to the genre that you're talking about. So for example, I've seen titles for podcasts that don't connect with certain things. Like if you're doing a travel podcast, I really think if it's travel heavy, there should be something travel related in the name, like very specifically travel related. And it doesn't have to be the word travel, but there should be something in there that cues the audience to what the show's going to be about. And I think that's one mistake that people often make, that they'll be like, the Maribel Quezada show. And it's like, what the hell does that mean? Because I don't know who you are. And I mean, I mean, no offense with that, but like most of us don't have that kind of notoriety where we can just call it the whatever name we have show. We have to be a lot more specific. So I would say like getting specific is very helpful, especially when it comes to SEO, as you well know, Eric, because that's your, one of your specialties. And same with the titles, like get try to get a little bit specific on what the subject's going to be about, and make sure that you are cueing in the audience into the week's topic or whatever episode that is in the title, but also in the description.
Perfect. Now, what about keeping your audience, your podcast audience? How do you avoid getting forgotten in a growing sea of over 1 million podcasts? Relevance.
I mean, it's such a thing that we fight for as creators and just as people in general. I mean, that's what social media is all for. It's to become relevant. So how do you do it? I mean, there are a lot of different ways. One is to continue to create. So consistency is key when it comes to staying top of mind. If you're consistent and creating and putting out that content on a regular basis, then people are going to see you consistently. As well as promotion. Like I said before, you may be creating awesome episodes, but if you're not telling people about them, then they're going to forget you. Keep in mind that just because somebody subscribes to your show, it doesn't mean that they're going to be listening. So you could have people hit that subscribe button, but as you know, the information populates automatically anytime the RSS feed alerts the podcast platform that there's a new show, it automatically downloads to your cell phone. You don't actually have to go download it yourself. The only way that you know there are new episodes for you to listen to is if you have an alert set up to where your phone lets you know, or if you click inside the podcast platform and you look for the podcast and it's like, oh, here's the latest episode for such and such podcast. So you need to be creating consistently, but you also need to be letting people know that you're putting out content. And that's one of the ways to stay relevant, but also being on other people's shows. So looking for places that you can guest on and speaking on other podcasts is also going to keep you top of mind.
Perfect. All right, I've got one more podcast question specifically, and I'm going to ask, I've got one other student question I'm going to ask. All right, so podcast question. So this one's metrics. So the question is, what are the metrics businesses should measure for their podcast?
As a business, it can vary. So it's a difficult question for me to answer because it really depends on what your business goal is with the podcast. So if you are a business that happens to have a podcast and that's just an extension of your marketing for your show, then what makes it worth it is, I would say, a combination of downloads with whatever call to action you're asking your audience to do. So I'm assuming that if you're a business, you're not going to have a podcast where you don't ask, where you're not asking people to do something related to your business, right? So one of your guests, I think he's already been on Evo, Tara. He's great at explaining this. He has a show called Podcast Pontifications, and it's all about the podcasting industry and what's going on in there. But at the same time, that show is free. He doesn't charge people to listen to that. But he also has a business where he helps people launch and create podcasts, especially businesses. So in every episode, he's saying, hey, by the way, if you need help creating your podcast, let me know. You can find me at blah, 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 blah.com. That's the call to action. So if I'm sure that he has some sort of metrics where people are clicking at the link in his show description to go to his website, and it's telling him how many visitors he's having. Also, he probably has a landing page specifically to the website that he's mentioning on the podcast, and that's how he can also tell what kind of traffic is getting on there. So my thing would be, what is your call to action and how much are people following it and how often? That's how you can actually gauge the success of having a business related podcast.
That's a great example. I like that. Just curious, but for Diferente or Birdies Not BS, what is the main call to action that you guys are looking for or measure?
Well, we don't really, so Diferente is an extension of what I do. And so for me, I do have a call to action, and it's to go to my website if you're ready to create content that's meaningful and connects with your ideal audience. So I have a specific landing page, and that's my call to action. For Birdies Not BS, we don't have a call to action as it pertains to going to a website or ending up on a landing page, because we're not a quote business. We're a medium. We're a source of information. So what we do is we measure our growth in downloads, but at the same time, also in connection with social media. So if we're growing our numbers on social media, on followers and interactions, so how's our engagement doing on social media? That is one of our biggest calls to action. Our call to action, I guess, technically would be when we're telling people, hey, go meet us over on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and let us know, what you thought about this episode, or share this with a friend. Hit us up, send us your questions. Make sure you let us know what you want to hear next time. So when we see that, that's how we measure our success when it comes to the call to action.
Great. Okay. All right. And then I've got one last student question and then just a wrap up question. We'll be all set. So, all right. So this comes from Allison in the class. And Allison says, I'm interested in pursuing a career in social media marketing because it's very interesting to me and usually schedules are flexible. I love travel and want to find a job that will let me do that. Do you think that this would be a good career for something like that? I am also worried that it's a very stressful job. Would you say that is true?
I don't know, Eric, what do you think? Because I don't work in social media.
Well, I think podcasting being like the extension, I guess. So
Okay.
what's your experience, I guess?
No, I mean, I'm honestly saying, what do you think? Because I feel like you would know way more about the lifestyle and stress of social media creation for sure. Um, if you're talking about podcasting or just content in general, like whether you want to be a producer or a host of a show, I mean, can you travel? Yes, but you also have to be on set a lot. If you're going to be a producer, you have to be on set often, or you have to be at some sort of meeting, or, you know, it's not that simple, especially when it comes to time. So for example, you could travel, but if you're in Asia and your clients in LA, it's going to be hard to navigate your schedules and connect. So I do think that that would be very stressful. Like, I don't want to be working at 3 o'clock in the morning. That's just not my jam. But that might be what you have to do if you're traveling while you're working. So you have to keep that in mind for sure. And I think that, I mean, yeah, production is stressful. Production can be stressful for sure, and long hours. I mean, I used to work 12-hour days a long time ago when I was first starting out, and that's the norm. Especially if you're first starting out, you have to expect that you're going to be putting in some long hours. And from what I hear, the ad agency world tends to be stressful as well. That's from my friends who work in ad agencies. So I want to say that, you know, if your goal is to not be stressed, then maybe maybe, you know, content is not necessarily the best avenue. I think that I would explore something a little bit different.
Very good. All right, and then just wrapping up. So as I mentioned, Maribel, a lot of the students have their own small businesses or have aspirations to launch their own businesses, have social media platforms, and some of them also are interested in becoming social media managers and roles similar to that. So any final tips, I guess, you could offer to, especially like budding entrepreneurs that might be in the class? Like what tips would you have for them as they continue on the rest of their college and then launching their business afterward?
Well, as far as like for launching your own business, I would say that you should definitely try to at least work for a few years under the wing of someone who is someone you respect. Learn from them, soak up everything you can from them, and make sure that you understand what it really takes to run a business before you decide that you want to do it yourself, because it's actually a lot harder than it looks. And I think that, you know, people don't often think about that, but it's the truth. I'm sorry, I'm not sugarcoating it. I do think that my experience, I wouldn't be able to do what I do now in working with clients or being organized in delivering on time. Like, deadlines are so important in production. I wouldn't be able to do that if I had not worked under so many successful producers, successful entrepreneurs, people who have taught me how to deliver quality, how to deliver on time, how to make sure that I speak to a client in a professional way, how to make sure that I put together budgets, how to properly forecast. I mean, these are all kinds of things that you need to understand how to run a business. Not to mention the fact that it really does take a lot more work and hours to actually have your own business than it does to work for someone else, because you don't think about the overhead. I mean, you have to do your accounting, you have to do your financials, you have to do a lot of different things, right? So I suggest that you need to definitely make sure that it's something you want to do by learning from another entrepreneur first.
Very good. So Maribel, I really do want to appreciate you taking the time for the class today. And I'm going to be posting the links to both of your shows. People want to connect with you. I've already shared your LinkedIn, so you might get some requests too from the class.
Yeah.
But thank you so
absolutely.
much for your time today, and best of luck with everything.
Thank you. Thank you so much for watching and for listening. And yeah, let me know if you guys have questions. I'm happy to help, and, you know, happy to guide you if that's something that I can answer. And if not, I can connect you with someone who can.
Great. Thanks so much. All right. Thank you, guys.
Bye.